Bill Cosby now facing a criminal trial over alleged sexual abuse. Now, he's had dozens of accusers, so why is this case different than the others? Our panel of attorneys here to hash it out. And if lawyers get an all-white or an all-black jury seated for a case, is that unconstitutional? Well, the Supreme Court just weighed in, and this could be a precedent setter. Then pro golfer Phil Mickelson, he made $1 million in a day from a stock tip he got, but he didn't get indicted for insider trading. Other people involved did, so meet the law professor who says it's all too easy to get away with insider trading. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Bill Cosby, he is headed to a criminal courtroom. Now, a judge ruled that the comedian must stand trial on charges he allegedly drugged and sexually assaulted a woman back in 2004. The 78-year-old actor waved to fans on his way into court Tuesday, where he learned the fate of his effort to avoid prosecution. The Pennsylvania judge ruling there is enough evidence for him to stand trial in a sexual assault case.
She was unable to consent. You know, that's the crime.
Not present in court, Andrea Constant, who prosecutors claim was drugged and sexually assaulted by the comedian at his Pennsylvania home in 2004. According to the criminal complaint, Constant told investigators that Cosby urged her to take 3 blue pills, and after ingesting them, everything became blurry and dizzy, saying she was unable to move or speak during the assault, and describing her condition as frozen and paralyzed. Cosby was never criminally prosecuted, the prosecutor at the time declining to press charges after an investigation. But in a civil deposition related to the same alleged encounter, Cosby admitted to kissing and heavy petting with Constant, but maintained that it was consensual.
There was no evidence of a crime here, and that the inconsistencies that plagued this investigation from the beginning continue to plague it now.
During the 3.5-hour hearing, Cosby's attorneys gave insight into their possible defense, questioning the detective who took Constant's statement about the number of times she crossed out and revised her statement to investigators. The defense also arguing that at no time did Constant ever say no or tell Cosby to stop.
After this so-called incident, the complainant continued to contact Mr. Cosby. The complainant accepted a dinner invitation from Mr. Cosby.
This is wrong.
This morning, a group of Cosby supporters say they've spent thousands of dollars to get ads on the air in defense of the embattled comedian, calling the case against Cosby a witch hunt. All right, let's get to our legal panel. Jim Kasuris, a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan who sits on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City. Mayo Bartlett. Mayo is an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC and a former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And Mark and Doug are goofing off this week. All right. Listen, if the phrase "hung by one's own petard" ever fits here, you know, people have been saying, "Hey, Jimmy, how many times have I heard cases brought against him? Why this time?" Well, statute of limitations, but also his own words, right?
Well, you know, yes. And the case and the investigation were fraught with problems that the defense, without all of this other evidence, would have seized upon and probably done very well. But the issue that's going to arise is whether or not his admissions concerning these other instances with other women are also going to come in as pattern crimes. He's positing a defense of consent. And when you actually posit a defense of consent, it happened but it was consensual, it happened but I didn't intend it, it happened but it was self-defense, then the people under the prosecution under certain circumstances can bring in evidence of other crimes to show a pattern to rebut that defense. And in reading some of his deposition
give
testimony,
an idea to the audience who hasn't heard some of this stuff, because he acknowledges, yeah, I gave him the pills, right? And
he acknowledges I gave him the pills. He acknowledges apparently that modeling agencies used to send him young women that he used to give pills and alcohol to, and he readily admits in his deposition that his intent was, or that immediately after giving them these drugs, that he had sexual relations with them. So Basically, he's saying, this is what I used to do. And now at this trial, because he's actually being prosecuted, he's claiming consent. And the problem he's going to have is his own words, not only in this case where he admits to sexual contact, but in all of the other cases where he freely and almost cavalierly admits this pattern of activity. That's going to come in to rebut his defense. So he's got problems.
And we heard the defense attorney say, hey, listen, she changed her story. She had dinner with him after the alleged assault, everything else. But Cosby's own words, Mayo, say, I drugged him. Yes, basically they lost consciousness or reasons after I drugged him. Then you can open, as Jimmy said, the pattern before that I do this. I'm a predator, in effect. He's acknowledging it. He's not running away from the fact. It doesn't matter how sketchy a witness it is if he's acknowledging that he's intending to. He does drug them, then he takes advantage of them when they're in an altered state. You know, game, set, match, right?
Well, not necessarily, and I say that for this reason. Consent comes in a number of different forms. And it's one thing to go to a party and you're drinking the punch and you don't know something's in the punch, and then you find yourself, you know, in a compromised position and you had no idea how that happened. It was never your intent to take any mood-altering drugs or anything that would be psychotropic, any alcohol, nothing like that. It's another thing to have someone say, hey, take these 3 blue pills. Most people are not going to just take those pills. So if you agreed to take these pills and if you agreed to party and use drugs and alcohol, then it does get into a question about whether there was consent. And there may be a pattern of the similar conduct. The other thing that's interesting here is that these people are going to Mr. Cosby's home. Now, no matter what happens here, Bill Cosby's fallen from grace because he's not the guy we thought he was, that everybody believed he was. And again, maybe we ought not deify people because we see them on TV. But if you're going there and this is happening, and it is significant that you continue to go back to this same person who victimized you, where you would imagine at least that a real victim would say, hey, I don't want to go to Mr. Cosby's house ever again.
But you can never, right by law, consent to assault, right? You
well,
can't
the
consent to
key to me really is going to be in his deposition. If he says that they are unconscious, at that point, even if they consented to everything else, once you're no longer conscious,
right?
then then at that point, it's indefensible.
The specific facts of the case, Rich, the investigation, the fact that it wasn't brought, I agree with defense counsel. It screams acquittal. The problem is, as you started the segment, when he provides that other evidence and that pattern evidence, it doesn't scream as loud. It doesn't scream as loud.
Obviously, we've all been, I'm sure a lot of people of ours have been in depositions for far different reasons, hopefully, than this. But this is an attorney sitting next to you in a deposition. At what point does he just not tackle his client and just say, stop?
You know, here's the problem. In reading the deposition and Bill Cosby's answers, it appears to me that the only way to have stopped him was to tackle him. You know, everybody blames the lawyer. How could you let him do that? This is clearly somebody
He sounds like he believes he was right, like he thinks he did nothing wrong.
No, it sounds to me like he doesn't care. There was something going on in his head that was telling him statute of limitations is run, it's not going to come back to me. There was something in his head that was telling him it's okay for me to say these things.
Well,
and I don't think his lawyer could have stopped him from just listening to him.
It could also have been that at that point in time, that was the culture in Hollywood, that happened, and that he's not the only guy that did stuff like that. There are a whole bunch of other celebrities that we revere who did the exact same thing, and to him, that was normal. That's what they did.
He had such an image. I have to tell you, there's something twisted
and more
about
than an
gratuitously
image,
admitting to these things.
And more than an image, Mayo, let's take
me.
off the legal hat for a second, right? And this has nothing to do with whether or not he should be found guilty or not, and what kind of a sentence if he is, all the rest. He not only was Mr. Huxtable, he not only embraced the rule, but he proselytized to the world as to how to conduct themselves. He told the African American community, controversially at times here, he indicted behavior and all the rest. He's not the first and he won't be the last to be a hypocrite. But my God.
Yeah, but Bill Cosby's an actor. You look at, and there are people in houses of worship all over this country who do exactly the same thing and worse, and with children sometimes. So when you stop and look, quite often it's the legislators who come up with a particular law that are violating that law every single day. So again, we tend to judge people very differently than we want to be judged.
You've seen the underside of humanity quite a bit, both of you guys.
I don't think they admit it in depositions.
No, not in depositions, no.
Yeah, to me, the more I read about this, the most distasteful thing beyond the behavior is he doesn't feel an scintilla of shame.
He didn't back
And he
then.
corrupted, I mean, young women who went to him. He had a pattern. He had a woman that he had a type of person he was going after, influential people who were coming to him for guidance, mentorship, that opened the doors to opportunity and whatever else. He targeted them. And this isn't a guy, I think, that would have had trouble finding a date.
See, that's
okay?
the thing.
And
That's
he
the
wanted
thing.
to basically make him comatose.
But Woody Allen did very similar things. In
But
fact,
you
Woody
can
Allen.
pick 100 examples. It's so grotesque,
But
though.
Woody Allen adopts his daughter. Who adopts a young lady and then marries her? So, you know, I mean, it's just, there are a lot of things that are quite bizarre that happen in Hollywood.
No, but this pattern bothers me so much because you're right. This is a fellow who at that time wouldn't have had a problem,
America's dad.
even with the very women that he abused. But there's something that he needed to have that control. It is grotesque.
And by the way, a lot of the women allege it was not remotely consensual or whatever, that this was obviously without anyone's knowledge. So we'll continue, obviously, to follow the case. Now, sometimes a case really is black and white. If an all-white jury is picked and they convict a black defendant, did the prosecution do anything wrong? In this case, the answer would be yes, that according to the highest court in the land.